The War of 1812. The decision for war. After Thomas Jefferson announced that he would not run again for president in 1808, the Republican Party nominated James Madison. The Federalists nominated Charles Pinckney, but Madison won the elections easily. He assumed office at a time when tensions between the United States and Britain were rising. It would fall to Madison to decide whether or not to lead the United States into its first full-scale war since the Revolution. Economic pressures. Like Jefferson, Madison wanted to avoid war. To force the British to stop seizing American ships, he asked Congress to pass the Non-Intercourse Act. This act forbade trade with France and Britain, but authorized the president to reopen trade with whichever country removed its trade restrictions first. In May 1810, Congress took a different approach with a plan drafted by Nathaniel Macon of North Carolina. The plan, called the Macon's Bill No. 2, reopened trade with both Britain and France, but stated that if either nation dropped its restrictions on trade, the United States would stop importing goods from the other nation. Soon afterward, Napoleon announced that France would no longer restrict American trade, but still allowed for the seizure of American ships. When Britain refused to drop its trade restrictions, Congress passed a Non-Importation Act against Britain. In June 1812, Britain finally ended all restrictions, but it was too late. Soon after, the British learned that the United States had declared war. The war hawks. Most members of Congress who wanted war came from the South and the West. Named the war hawks by their opponents, they believed the nation's reputation was in danger if the United States did not go to war to stop the British from seizing American sailors. Americans in the South and the West had other reasons for wanting to go to war. British trade restrictions had hurt Southern planters and Western farmers, who earned much of their income by shipping crops overseas. Western farmers also accused the British in Canada of arming Native Americans and encouraging them to attack American settlements. Tecumseh at Tippecanoe. Although Western settlers blamed the British for their problems with the Native Americans, it was the increasing demands of speculators and settlers that sparked Native American resistance. Tecumseh, a Shawnee leader, wanted Native Americans to unite to protect their lands. While Tecumseh worked for political union, his brother, Tenskwatawa, the prophet, called for the spiritual rebirth of Native American cultures. He and his followers lived at Prophetstown on the Tippecanoe River in Indiana. Aware that Tecumseh's movement was gaining strength, William Henry Harrison, governor of Indiana Territory, prepared to stamp it out. In November 1811, after learning that Tecumseh had gone south to recruit more followers, he gathered a force that marched towards Prophetstown. Tenskwatawa sent fighters to intercept Harrison and his troops near the Tippecanoe River. The ensuing Battle of Tippecanoe resulted in about 150 casualties on both sides, but the Americans claimed it as a victory. The clash shattered Native American confidence in the prophet. Many, including Tecumseh, fled to Canada. Tecumseh's flight to Canada and the British-made rifles his forces had been using seemed to be evidence of British support. Many Western farmers argued that war with Britain would enable the United States to seize Canada and end the attacks by Britain's Native American allies. In June 1812, President Madison gave in to the pressure and asked Congress to declare war. The vote in Congress split along regional lines. The South and the West generally voted for war, the Northeast did not. The invasion of Canada. Although the Republican-led Congress had called for war, the nation was not ready to fight. The Army had fewer than 7,000 troops and little equipment. The Navy had only 16 ships. Americans were deeply divided over the war. Many people in New York and New England called it Mr. Madison's War, implying that it did not deserve the nation's support. Paying for the war also posed a problem. The year before, the charter that authorized the Bank of the United States had expired. This made it difficult for the government to borrow money because most private bankers located in the Northeast opposed the war and would not lend money to the government. Despite this, President Madison ordered the military to invade Canada and later rechartered the bank. 3 strikes against Canada. American military leaders planned to attack Canada from 3 directions: from Detroit, from Niagara Falls, and up the Hudson River Valley toward Montreal. All 3 attacks failed. The British Navy on Lake Erie moved troops to Detroit and forced the American commander, General William Hull, to surrender. The British then shifted their troops to the Niagara Peninsula, where they took up positions on Queenston Heights along the river. From there, they easily dropped off some 600 American troops who had landed on the Canadian side of the river. The American force would have been larger, except that the New York militia refused to cross the river, arguing that the terms of their service did not require them to leave the country. The third American attack fared no better than the first 2. General Henry Dearborn, marching up the Hudson River toward Montreal, called off the attack after militia troops again refused to cross the border. Perry's victory on Lake Erie. The following year, the United States had more success after Commodore Oliver Perry arranged for the construction of a fleet on the coast of Lake Erie in Ohio. On September 10, 1813, Perry's fleet attacked the British fleet. After a grueling 4-hour battle, the British surrendered. After Perry's victory gave the Americans control of Lake Erie, he notified General Harrison, "Dear General, we have met the enemy, and they are ours. 2 ships, 2 brigs, 1 schooner, and 1 sloop. Yours with great respect and esteem." The victory also enabled Harrison to recover Detroit and march into Canada, where he defeated the retreating British and Native American forces at the Battle of the Thames River. British troops and Canadian militia, however, stopped the American attack from the east at the Battle of Stony Creek, and Harrison retreated to Detroit. By the end of 1813, the United States still had not conquered any territory in Canada. The war ends. In 1814, Napoleon's empire collapsed. With the war against France over, the British were now able to send more of their military to deal with the United States. British attacked Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. In August 1814, a British fleet sailed into the Chesapeake Bay and landed troops within marching distance to Washington, D.C. The British easily dispersed the poorly trained militia defending the capital and entered the city unopposed. Madison and other government officials fled. The British set fire to the White House and the Capitol. Baltimore, however, was ready for the British. The city militia inflicted heavy casualties on the British troops that went ashore. After bombarding Fort McHenry, the British abandoned their attack. Francis Scott Key, a young lawyer held aboard a British ship during the shelling, was elated to see the American flag still flying above the fort at dawn. On the back of a letter, he scribbled a poem about the battle that would later become the national anthem of the United States, the Star-Spangled Banner. Events in New England and New Orleans. In December 1814, Federalists from New England met in Hartford, Connecticut, to discuss what they could do independently of the United States. Members of the Essex Junto urged New England to secede, but moderate delegates refused to support such extreme action. Instead, the Hartford Convention called for constitutional amendments designed to increase the region's political power. That same month, a British fleet with some 7,500 men landed near New Orleans. The American commander, General Andrew Jackson, had not yet received the news that negotiators had signed the Treaty of Ghent on December 24. On January 8, 1815, Jackson led the American troops to a decisive victory in the Battle of New Orleans. He became a national hero. As nationalism surged, the Federalists at the Hartford Convention appeared unpatriotic, and they never recovered nationally. The War of 1812 increased the nation's prestige overseas and generated a new spirit of patriotism and national unity.